Welcome back to Daytime Ottawa. Back to talk about a serious subject, but my next guest is added some humor in discussing a serious subject, very personal to her. The book is called, and I'm going to read the title because I could not memorize it properly. It's called The Skinny, My Messy Hopeful Fight for Full Recovery from Anorexia, a decently comical memoir. Welcome to Sheri Segal Glick. Sheri, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. I say that 10 times fast.
Yeah, I tried last night and it didn't work, so that's why it didn't stick here. But it's an important book, but I imagine it's just as important for you personally to have penned this book. Tell us a little bit about your background, Sheri.
So I presume when you say about my background, you mean my eating disorder?
That's correct.
Not just like what my parents do.
That's right.
Yeah, so I developed anorexia when I was a young teenager.
Okay.
And I was acutely ill for a number of years. I was in and out of the hospital. And then when I was, I guess, somewhere between undergrad and law school, so somewhere in those years, I considered myself better, and I fell into this place that I now know to be quasi-recovery or semi-recovery, and so where I still had a pretty rampant eating disorder, but to me, because I was so much better than I was, I actually thought that I was well.
Right.
And then it wasn't until the birth of my third child, actually, where I had an accidental mini relapse. I know that sounds like the most ridiculous oxymoron you've ever heard in your life.
No.
That's what I should have named the book, actually. Accidental mini relapse. And then I started this recovery effort and realized I'd actually never been well. But I just didn't know for all of those years, sort of in between very acute illness and recovery, all of these years in between, I was actually quite unwell.
So when you finally made that decision into full recovery, I guess let's call it,
Yeah.
did you reach out to a professional? Like, how did you begin recovery?
So what initially happened is after the birth of my third child, I just didn't have an appetite. I just wasn't hungry and wasn't used to, and I talk about this in the book, but I had a lot of trouble eating when I wasn't hungry. So just like lost a bunch of weight, slowly and not intentionally. And, but then one day I got on the scale and the numbers that I saw were sort of like, I was used to them, and then one day I saw a number that I wasn't used to.
Okay.
And that sort of shocked me, and I had this moment of kind of like fear, elation, and I figured the elation part was not ideal, so made an appointment with a psychologist.
Okay.
And went to see her, and even at that appointment, by the time it's a very long wait, and even now, like longer waits because
Really?
COVID. Like wait lists are crazy, but even at the time it was a pretty long wait, like probably 7 or 8 months. So by the time I saw her, I actually did have hunger cues again, and so I went to see her, and I was like, well, I'm mostly better, but thought we could like tweak a couple things. And she's like, oh, okay, well, tell me what's going on. And I'm like, I think it's like maybe remnants from when like I used to have anorexia. She's like, okay, well, tell me about it. And I said, well, I can only eat when I'm hungry. She's like, well, what if it's mealtime and I'm not? And I'm like, no. And she's like, okay, well, what are some other of your remnants? I'm like, well, I have to, like everyone else, I have to measure everything before I eat it. I have to know the exact calorie count, and I can only,
Wow.
I can't have anything with the sauce on it, and I can't have anything fried, and I can't have anything, and like I had this like huge list, and I have to exercise constantly and walk everywhere. And she's like, well, that's because you still have anorexia. And I was like, no, like I know what anorexia looks like, and it's not this. Like I eat carbs. People with anorexia eat carbs, and she's like, yeah, people without anorexia eat carbs too, like me, like people like me. And so then she was like, okay, well, you know what? Cool. Go home, throw out your food scale, stop exercising all the time, stop weighing and measuring your food, come back and tell me how it goes. And that's sort of the moment that I realized that I still had a pretty big problem.
I mean, as you talk, you're laughing about it, and
Yeah.
I know that you've interjected some humor in this memoir.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to do that on such a serious topic?
Well, I mean, for a bunch of reasons. I mean, firstly, I wanted to make it, more digestible, no pun intended. You know, sorry.
Well played.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But you know, I wanted to write the kind of book that I would want to read, or that I would actually want to write. Like I find, like, I don't think the world needs another super sad, super maudlin recovery memoir. I think you can say really important things and also inject humor. And I think for me personally, humor is my most important language, and just the way I communicate with people. And so I just wanted to write the kind of book that I would want to pick up, but also a book that I would want to write. Like it would have been really hard for me to write something that was super serious the whole way through. You know, it's not a joke book. People aren't going to pick it up and be like, this is the funniest thing I've ever read in my entire life, you guys. You should see her stand-up act. No.
Right.
It's still a recovery memoir, but I wanted it to be not just for people who have eating disorders.
I was going to ask you about that, because that's, I mean, you made a point of that, to write a book that, of course, is about your experiences, but it's not necessarily, oh, okay, this is a book just for people with eating disorders.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Because, well, I mean, one interesting thing that I sort of reflected on, you know, in my recovery, and especially sort of throughout my recovery, and, you know, since starting to talk about the book a little bit, is that diet culture, which we're exposed to all the time, every day, and quasi-recovery are very, very similar. You know, I refer the book to quasi-recovery being the, like, less attractive cousin of diet culture. Like, she, you know, is still, like, not as quite as pretty and popular, but gets invited to all the parties, you know. So, because when you have an eating disorder and you don't look acutely ill, people say, like, you get compliments all the time. People want to hear about your workouts. People don't think your weird eating habits are, like, they admire them quite frequently.
Were people surprised to find out you had an eating disorder?
The people that I grew up with obviously knew that I'd been very ill, and I think they presumed that I was better, or the people that I'm very close to presumed that, like, not quite better was as good as I was going to get.
Did anyone talk to you about it?
No.
No one approached you?
No one. No. Like, even when I was, you know, obviously I, you know, lost a decent amount of weight, and it never really shows in my face, and I wore kind of baggy clothes, so in defense of, like, everybody in my life. But, you know, if somebody did, like, mention that I had gotten really skinny, and I was like, oh, well, do I look bad? And she's like, no. And so...
I've got 10 seconds left. Where can people pick up a copy of this great book?
Indigo, Amazon, your local, a lot of local bookstores.
And Perfect Books, you have a book launch, and I'll tell everybody at the end of the show about that.